Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this episode of Through the Ages, we're going to be looking at the Vikings. Now, the goal of this series, as always, is to dive into the ways civilizations have changed between their initial design in Age of Kings and today in 2022. In this case, though, we're actually going to start a little farther back than usual, going back to the earliest conceptions of the game when it was nothing more than a reskin of AoE 1. Pre-alpha, when the direction of the game was still being hammered out, Vikings were originally intended to be one of a very select few raider civilizations with totally different game mechanics. Raider military units could capture enemy villagers and convert them by bringing them back to their town center. You could pillage trade carts or even buildings to steal resources directly from your enemy's stockpile. And your buildings could also pack up and move, identical to Mongols in Age of Empires 4. The trade-offs for these advantages were that raider civilizations had to garrison villagers to turn them into military units rather than recruit them from buildings, and they could also only have one town center at a time. The concept was for more differentiation between civilizations in AoE 2, and this mechanic was going to be unique to Vikings, Mongols, and Celts, and I suspect it was at least partly inspired by Viking raids of the British Isles, given several of the parallels. Of course, the raider concept didn't make it into the final game, and seemingly never made it past the early planning stages. But especially with the Vikings' unique units, the concept of being tuned toward raiding always seemed to be at the forefront. In the official Age of Kings release in 1999, the Vikings bonuses ended up being pretty similar at a glance to what they are today, though a lot of the details have since changed. Their warships were 20% cheaper, infantry gained a staggered HP bonus starting in Feudal, they received their iconic free wheelbarrow and handcart, and their whole team's docks were 33% cheaper. The cheaper docks and warships, of course, made them immediately a top water civilization, almost to the point of being typecast in the early days as a water-only civ. That's actually a reputation it seems they had to fight to some extent up until relatively recently. Their unique units are of course still the same on the surface, but were very different in terms of balance. Longboats required castles to be built first and took 64% longer to train than they do now, which was even longer back then than the war galley, making them quite difficult to mass. Berserks also took longer to train, moved slower, had less pierce armor, less HP, less attack in Castle Age, were more expensive to upgrade, and had no way of adding bonus damage against cavalry. So they were just overall not as good of a unit in pretty much every way possible. They always had their unique healing ability though, making them especially good at quick raids and retreating only to attack a few minutes later back at full health. Graphic-wise, you sometimes see the criticism of the horned helmets being historically inaccurate, though legendary designer and developer Sandy Petersen acknowledged in an interview that they obviously knew that was inaccurate and just decided to play into the meme. General player opinions and comments from 1999 are difficult to find, so it's not clear how pervasive the idea was that they were only good as a water civ, or how many players realized their potential with either infantry or archers. Sandy Petersen in 1999 points out he thought they had good archers from the start, so he definitely realized their land potential, and elsewhere mentioned they were a popular civ among internal playtesters, even on land maps. He also expressed a lot of confidence in Berserks, even before their later buffs, and thought they were quite strong, even favoring them over Barracks units. Even just looking at the wording of the question though, it gives the sense that Vikings may have been interpreted by players on land maps as a fish out of water, not realizing the incredible power of free wheelbarrow and handcart. In the following year, the Conquerors expansion was released with a number of important changes. The first is unique techs were introduced, with Berserker Gang added to double the healing rate of Berserks. Berserks were also made 17% faster and gained 1 pierce armor, the combination of which helped Berserks raid under town center fire and escape before enemy infantry or archers could intercept. There was one large nerf though to their team bonus, reducing their dock discount from 33% to 25%. Offsetting that, their longboats also became much faster to train. Basically, you can now create 5 in the time it previously took to create 3. Also importantly, Thumbring was added to the game and given to Vikings, though they missed out on the newly introduced Bloodlines, Hussar, and Halberdier. Petersen, at one point on the topic of Halberdiers, mentioned that usually horse-strong civs didn't get it, or maybe more accurately, camel civs didn't get it, which is notable as Vikings were the only civ to not have Halberdiers and also not get camels. Elsewhere though, he explicitly says they worried about Vikings being too strong in the super late game. An important piece of context to add there is that the Elite Skirmisher gained its +3 bonus damage against pikemen in Conquerors at the same time, and it could have been they worried that the Viking Halberdier's extra HP would prevent the Elite Skirmisher from being the counter unit it was intended to be. Between all of the new techs, units, and civilizations, you can see there was a lot they were trying to balance just as Conquerors came out. For the next decade plus, the reputation of Vikings was that they were unquestionably top tier on water thanks to cheap docks and warships, but their perception on land maps was a mixed bag, especially among casual players. Looking at comments made during that time period, there are examples of players asking whether Vikings were in fact useless on land maps, though at the same time there were others happy to point out Vikings had good infantry, arbalesters, and what's really been seen more and more over time as a top tier economy. During that period though, the Berserk itself was never a very popular unit, which is in contrast to Peterson's expectations in Age of Kings that even their initial balance made them quite attractive during internal playtesting. We've seen this before in the series with other civilizations already, where the competitive meta shifted toward archers and cavalry over infantry, at least in the mid-game. In 2013's expansion, The Forgotten, Vikings were then massively overhauled with nerfs on water while simultaneously boosting their relatively unpopular unique units. First, their warship bonus was staggered instead of a straight 20% discount, which slowed them down especially in Feudal Age. Similarly, their team dock discount went from -25% to -15%, now less than half of what it was in Age of Kings, with longboats given a slight discount to compensate. Berserks were then the focus of multiple buffs to their creation time, HP, and Berserker Gang also had its cost rearranged to make it easier to afford. This is also when they gained their second unique tech Chieftains, which initially gave Berserks +4 attack against cavalry, excluding camels. Even after these changes though, it seemed like Vikings were still treated as an archer civilization with a good eco bonus on land. In this exchange, for example, just after The Forgotten was released, it seems at least here the perception was that chieftains changed very little about the Berserk, and of course at this point the tech only applied to their unique unit. Shortly afterward in African Kingdoms, in addition to adding arson to the game, giving all infantry units extra attack against buildings, Chieftain's cost was reduced, while also seeing a bump to its damage against cavalry. A few patches later, Chieftains was again encouraged by applying to all Viking infantry units and gaining an extra +2 against camels. Keep in mind at this point camels were still considered by the game to be ships and not cavalry, so they had previously been unaffected. Longboats also had their costs brought up again, but critically no longer required a castle to be built first, so you can make them immediately upon hitting Castle Age. This is easy to overlook, but was a game changer that made them useful for reclaiming water control that had been lost in Feudal, letting you rebuild your navy quickly if you can hit Castle Age first. While this all sounds very good for Vikings, they were simultaneously hit hard in African Kingdoms by the introduction of the Feudal Age Fire Galley, which at least before a couple of later nerfs became the clear default Feudal Age choice. Vikings, of course, lack the fireship line, and by this point, Italians and Portuguese had also been added to the game. So despite some improvements on water, Vikings had stiff competition by this point as a top-tier water civilization. The next DLC, Rise of the Rajas, helped restore some of that former glory though, with warships gaining a bit more of a discount in Feudal. Chieftains, of course, now applying to all infantry, was also made even better against camels, again pushing for Vikings to focus on infantry in the late game against even camel civilizations. Finally, heading into 2019's definitive edition, it was clear by this point that Vikings were actually very strong on land, with free wheelbarrow and handcart being universally acknowledged as among, if not the best eco bonus in the game. With that in mind, Chieftains, which was now much better than its original form in 2013, had its cost bumped up significantly. This is in fact the first time we saw it change to Vikings aimed at making their infantry worse in any way, though Definitive Edition simultaneously added supplies, free tracking, and decreased the cost of squires, so the net result was still probably an improvement to Viking infantry. The main thing from a competitive perspective though was that their archers hadn't been impacted and remained the most common default choice on land, though that was about to be targeted next. Soon after, in the Dawn of the Dukes DLC, Vikings lost Thumbring. The developers were apparently fed up with dangling the carrot to push Vikings toward infantry and decided it was time to bring out the stick. So just like that, Vikings no longer had fully upgraded crossbows and arbalesters. Looking back on the official forums, AoE Zone, and Reddit, it seems this was a controversial change, though I do mean controversial and not universally disliked. Arguments ranged from this was removing the one thing Vikings were good at on land, to the more positive idea that this may increase the variety of strategies you could expect from Vikings. There was a certain level of comfort factor at play, no doubt as well, since this was a tech added way back in Conquerors that players were very used to being part of the Vikings playbook. To offset losing Thumbring, Viking infantry were given plus 20% HP starting in Feudal, and Berserks were given more attack, melee armor in Castle Age, trained a little faster, and their elite upgrade was made significantly cheaper. Especially recently, there's been a big push for infantry, and Vikings have been one of the civilizations caught up in that, being pushed intentionally, it seems, away from archers. I'm genuinely curious what Mr. Peterson would have thought back in 2000, knowing everything in store for Berserks, which he seemed to have thought were already quite good even at that time. Despite all of the infantry buffs and loss of Thumbring though, I suspect if you ask many players, they'll still say that Vikings are competitively a crossbow and arbalest civ first, though with Berserks as a very useful weapon in the late game, albeit with some expensive unique techs. To give a rough sense of where they stand at the moment, Vikings on open maps are comfortably above average, with a particularly strong early Imperial Age spike, performing best in 35 to 45 minute long games. Closed maps are always a bit trickier to gauge, but at the moment they're performing around average. The general perception that I've seen these days is that they're still indisputably a strong naval civ, while being rarely if ever questioned as a very capable land civilization as well. But hopefully that was an interesting look back at the evolution of the Viking civilization in Age of Empires 2. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.